This is our second webinar of the 2016-2017 school year. I'd like to thank the Middle Grades Collaborative for helping support this project. I'd also like to thank the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education for their support. And PLP Pathways is designed to be a teacher-driven personal learning network for teachers. It's sort of a grassroots organization to help with the implementation of personal learning plans, personalization, and the integration of proficiency-based learning and flexible pathways into the curriculum as per Act 77. My name is Don Taylor. I teach language arts and social studies at Main Street Middle School. And today we have three of our core contributors joining us, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Kevin Hunt. I'm a 5'8" generalist at Williston Central School.
Hi, I'm Maura Kelly. I teach 7th and 8th grade humanities at People's Academy Middle Level.
And hi, I'm Lindsay Hallman. I teach on the Edge Academy team at Essex Middle School.
And before we go too much further, I just want to make sure that we give Lindsay some time to talk a little bit more about her blog post related to sustainability and Shelburne Farms. And we can maybe fit that right in there at the towards the end or within the context of the conversation today. I noticed that behind Maura is a coping with stress sign and also staying in control. And yeah. It feels like this is the time of the year when those things are getting a little bit tenuous, to say the least, just because it's so busy. On the agenda today, we had, and there's Allison too. Hi, Allison, how are you?
Good, you?
Good. You want to just introduce yourself real quick to our audience?
Allison, I work at U32. I teach 9th grade earth science and junior anatomy.
Okay, thank you very much. So today, just on the agenda, we wanted to talk about conferences and parent communications. Also maybe about how folks are integrating proficiency and personalization in the classroom, some project-based learning and student choice, and perhaps that's where we can talk about that sustainability. Also some extended learning opportunities. That's becoming a bigger conversation within personalization and proficiency. And then maybe opportunities that people are taking or know about for professional development. So if we could just start out first, where are people in the conferences, parent communications, sort of assessment reporting stage? If we could we'll start with Maura, Lindsay, then Kevin and Allison, and just kind of tell us where you are in that process and how you've been communicating your efforts with parents. And Maura, could you start us out?
Yep. So last week on Thursday, actually, we had our student-led conferences for the year. So we had our students have their personal goals and their sort of portfolio site already. And we also had them make a presentation around the proficiencies that we've worked on so far this year. And they gave a presentation to their parents. And I had, for my TA, I had 12 students out of about 18 who were able to give the presentation here at school. And then the remainder of the students, the expectation is that they do the presentation at home. And there's a Google form that all parents fill out with their students around, successes that they've seen in their students, something that surprised them, how, it's some prompts for parents to have a discussion with their students at the end. And so that's how we've kind of kept families who maybe couldn't have a traditional in the school student-led conference, keeping them in the loop. And then I would follow up with a phone call. And one of the big things that we're noticing, we've also shifted sort of the structure of our school. So we went from teaching straight grades to now I'm on a multi-age team, and we've just had some different shifts. And so we're feeling more than ever that parents are needing more information. So as a district, we have a website that's coming out around proficiency-based learning and Act 77 and personalized learning at the district level. And then I'm working with a teacher actually to do some action research within our school as part of our sort of mentoring program here at school. And so we're designing an action research around parent communication within our school and really trying to tackle that problem and make sure parents have the information that they need. Because it seems like parents were really positive at the student-led conferences, but it feels like with all these changes that are happening, parents are feeling like they need more information to really be equipped to navigate sort of what's happening and understand what their children are saying.
Got it. Thank you. Lindsay?
So just like Maura, we had our student-led goal-setting conferences last Thursday and Friday, and we're still continuing with them throughout blocks this week and next, just to make sure that we can have goal-setting conferences with all of our students. The first part of the conference was actually an at-home conference component, which we've done for always. We've always had our kids do kind of what we've called like the flip conference, where they go home and they share their learning with their families. Thus far for the year, we use Google Classroom, so they show them Classroom and what they've been working on, and started to talk about the strengths of their work and the strengths of what they are sharing, and some of their goals. So they're starting to formulate their goals, and they had draft goals that they presented to their parents at home, and then they talked with their parents. They brought their there was kind of like a part one was at home, and then part two was with Phil, my teammate, and I, and the student led a conference, sharing their the beginning stages of their PLP, which is, we're using Protein this year. So they shared their about me, and then they shared their 3 goals and their steps for completion. And in Protein, the goals are listed as academic, personal, and career focused. And so we had them set a goal in each of those areas with specific steps, depending on, whether it's a short, medium, or long-term goal. And so that's where we are with our goal setting. And we've seen almost all of our families, and had conferences with them. And then we're continuing to conference. We continue to conference this week and next week to make sure that we are touching base with all of the families. But most of the conferencing happens at home. We want them to have a dialogue at home, and then the part that's essential when they come to the school to talk together is around their goals and how we all can support them.
Okay, you're not actually the one driving right now, Lindsay, are you?
I'm not driving. I pulled over.
Okay, I was just checking because I just want to make sure. All right, Kevin?
I am in my car though. So.
Well, I noticed that, but I just hoped you're not in traffic or anything.
No. I'm not going to drive for this.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So we have just finished up, minus just a couple, with our student-led goal-setting conferences. We typically end up doing them before and after schools on our schedule, so we end up not. What's nice is our district, they build in a day just for conferences, but since they take 35 to 45 minutes if you're doing justice to them, we typically get them done before that day happens, which was last Friday. It's been going well. It's one thing that I've adjusted this year that's been really helpful is while I'm setting goals and with the students and with their families, and while the students are setting goals, is pushing them and asking them at the time, like, what's some evidence, what would evidence look like for this? In the past, they've set goals and we've written them down, then we feel them out for a while because they set their 5 different transferable skills goals, and we readdress them again at their portfolio conferences. But this definitely helped to get them thinking and engaging with, okay, what am I going to be looking for these goals? And it helped with making sure they understood the goal that they were coming up with and that the parent was on board with it. And it made it more cohesive. And I've seen it's been a better process on this end during our PLP time that we give them once a week, just checking in, seeing what kind of evidence they are coming up with. They seem like they just have a better handle on it than they have in years past.
Okay. Allison, are you conferencing?
We are actually November 10th and 11th. So it's great to hear from all of you what you've been doing. And I'm going to steal some of them, some of your ideas. Maura, if you could share the Google form, the questions that you asked, parents, that would be super helpful. Thank you. This is our first year as 9th grade teams. It is unprecedented that we are having conferences the way they were going to run them this year, as 30 minutes student-led. And I do not believe we'll be at the like prepared for the goal sharing out at that time, but we will be ready for the just about me principles and values. And then at that point, in their 4 kind of like core classes, they will share out some work towards proficiency for their parents. So that'd be great to have the form for that accountability and just kind of parent reflection. Was this helpful? Do you prefer this to the normal just like teacher-parent interaction conference, which is what sophomores, juniors, and seniors will experience? So yeah, we're on the horizon of that. I'll let you all know how it goes with our conferences.
Okay, that that sounds good. We go into conferences next week, and I just want to go back to what Kevin and Lindsay alluded to, is that this year I did it a little bit different. We set goals pretty much. We did the identity page, and then we got right into the goals. And somebody had mentioned to me last summer. They said, "Oh, well, why don't you set goals right at the beginning of the year, because then you can talk about growth mindset and all this." And I was like, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. But in retrospect, I don't think it's the best way of doing it. And I have just a couple of observations. One is that now kids set their goals at the beginning of the year, but then over the course of this 6 or 7 weeks, I'm starting to know them better as a student. And so now I feel like I could do a much better job of helping them set those goals. So part of that identity phase is actually getting to know them and what they're going to need in terms of goals, right? And having the kids set a goal in the second week of school, I think it's better to wait a little bit and to really understand, quote, that honeymoon period is over now. And now you can see where kids are struggling. And I think that also the progress reports came out. And what I do is I have the kids look at the progress reports and review those pretty carefully, and then do some writing about that, and then also figure out what the strengths and challenges demonstrated in their progress reports are, and whether or not that evidence matches their goals, right? And I think in the future, what I would do is wait until the progress report comes out, and then use that as one piece of the goal setting process. So that you look at that first progress report, and then you have the conference, and that's where you might want to really identify some solid goals. And I just think that, as Kevin alluded to, having a really smooth process, and I changed my process, and it hasn't gone as smoothly as I've wanted to. And that's definitely something that I think, go back to and change, is waiting to set those initial goals a little bit later, so that you could really have more meaningful goals. And it could be based on some of the evidence that the kids have already demonstrated. And so that's sort of a change. The other thing I want to point out too is that Kevin, Kevin and Sam Nelson are in the Chittenden South Supervisory Union, and you guys had pushed out that information. I think Sam Nelson had shared some of his graphics, and then CVU has a website for proficiency-based learning and personalization. Yeah. And I went to that website and I kind of checked out what people were, what they were doing. And we put together a letter that talked about proficiencies and also the flexible pathways. And I think this goes to what Maura was saying, how I do think parents have a lot of questions right now. And I think it's really important that we're providing resources for them, both as teachers and as organizations. So anyway, I just think, the goal setting and the conferencing. And then I guess one question I also had was to Lindsay, how extensive or what kind of preparation do you give to your kids to have that conversation at home with Google Classroom? Do you have a script? Do you have them practice? Do you have them record it or reflect on that?
So, well, we don't have a script per se, but we give them an outline. Also, it's through Classroom, we push out it was a 2-part outline that they could, first of all, think about. Well, they did a lot of thinking around why we set goals, and then, we've always waited until conference time for goal setting, because I agree, Dawn, I think it's really important for them to really understand who they are, even though we have kids for 2 years, we're multi-age, so I know half my kids very well, and then my new 7th graders I'm getting to know them, but goals change, and kids change very rapidly in middle school. So I think that was probably an interesting experiment in some ways, to see what would happen if you set goals earlier versus later. But we give them an outline and we keep it pretty open. We give them some questions that will guide their conversation with their with the adult at home, and we feel like they have enough to share as far as just talking about what they're doing, how they use Classroom, talking about they identified 3 pieces of work that they felt or 3, it didn't have to be necessarily work, but 3 things that showed success for them thus far in the first couple months of school, and 3 areas that showed some areas that they'd like to grow in or work on. And so that was their conversation starters if they needed something. So they had the 3 strengths and the 3 areas of growth, and then they asked their parents if they had any questions for them about their learning, and if there was any questions they wanted to bring specifically to their conference, and they recorded those on the doc, and then they brought those to the conference so we could all talk about that together. And then when they got to the conference, they essentially just shared their bio out loud, just because it's really nice to hear that out loud and for them to share that piece. And then they shared their goals, and then they addressed the questions if the adult at home had questions. If we had further questions, we also helped them develop more steps to achieving their goals. So it was really more of a time for us all to work on tightening up the goals and making sure they were they had done work prior to the conference. And I have to say, said to my teammate Phil, I felt like their goals, when you think about like the SMART goal format, which we talked to them about, they were really smart. We kept saying, oh gosh, yes, these are definitely SMART goals, because they were they had all the necessary components, and their steps were really specific. And so it was clear that they had spent enough time thinking about their goals. They weren't, in past years, there have been great goals, but there's always been some kids that really struggle with the goal setting process. And I think this year, having time to really think about it again, but then also time with their families to really talk through their goals. And I don't know if maybe we're using Protean for the first time. And there's a really, the transferable skills are all there, and they're becoming familiar with the transferable skills, the language, and how to share evidence. And so maybe that's just becoming more a part of their vocabulary, because definitely the goals were at a different level this year.
So I had a question, and I'm gonna kind of riff off of what Lindsay was saying. And the question was to everybody: how are you getting kids the language and the vocabulary of goal setting? And because Lindsay, you said strengths and then areas to grow in, and that's just a different way of saying, I think, something that we're all familiar with. And so if we could just go around, and if you could tell me how you're getting kids to be using that vocabulary, and how you're getting that into their minds, and how that's working, I would appreciate that. So Maura, why don't we start with you, and we'll just go right down the row.
So at our school, we use, they're called mission-related goals. So instead of using the state's transferable skills, our district has adopted mission-related goals. And so we have 11 indicators, and we have students at the beginning of the year do a lot of work with the language, the vocabulary around it. We do a lot of drawings based on them. We have posters around, like, that the students have created using the language. We talk about it in the classroom a lot. We had them, one of the things that we had them do was we gave them sort of a graphic organizer with all the words, and then they would draw sort of a picture or put it in their own words if they were to explain to someone else what that meant. Just like communicate effectively, what does that mean? And then a time when they've communicated effectively. So could they link that to something that they've done in school, or a place in school or outside of school where they might have done this? And that was kind of a good way for us to identify where there are gaps, like what are the ones where students are kind of struggling with the most. Because I feel like for some things they feel really concrete, and for other of our indicators they feel a little bit more vague to students, and so that's been really helpful. But I think we also have been trying really hard to use them in class a lot more, and being more mindful about really using the vocabulary that we're expecting them to be using.
Okay. Kevin?
We start off right from our Hopes and Dreams conferences where our fifth graders using that language, and when we send home the summer mailing before that, it's all based on strengths and areas of growth is how we frame the different categories that the students end up discussing with their parents before we even have a chance to meet them for the first time. So that starts up from day one, and with us, we're lucky because we're a 4-year team, so we're 5'8". We have the same students, so once we establish that in the beginning, it just kind of it sticks. And then when the students are talking to their mentors, the 7th and 8th grade mentors, that's the language that they're using already. So it's just, I guess it's embedded in the culture already. So we don't, we honestly don't do a whole lot of specific or explicit teaching around that language. It's just, it just kind of is. So it's a hard process to explain, but I think it does start from those early Hopes and Dreams conferences, using that language off the bat. And then since we luckily have these students for 4 years, by the time the older students are mentoring the younger students, that's just part of the culture and language that they're used to using.
So Kevin, just real quick, Maura mentioned that her language is across the school.
Yep.
Is the language that you're using, is that across the school, or is that more based in the teams?
It's more, it's starting to become more school-based. Up until this year, Swift House was one of the only teams that used online portfolios and had a PLP process. So the rest of the school is definitely, since Act 77 has taken that on. I think it's using language such as like what are your strengths and what are your areas of growth. I think that's culturally just what you do as an educator. So I think that's already around and at the younger levels too. So that's not a huge adjustment. But most everybody now is using a Google site this year, and I've heard nothing but positive things in terms of what that's done for conferences and giving students more voice and letting them advocate for themselves and be a little more reflective in their thinking and learning.
Okay. And then Allison, since this is the first year that you've been using Teams and doing the PLPs, have you thought about language, and what's your team's thinking on that?
Right, we've definitely not gotten to that point yet. We're still very much in the identity, getting to know our students, how this team's going to work together. I foresee that being a conversation we have at one of our team-wide meetings within the next month as we move towards the goals section.
Okay. All right. Did anybody else have, Lindsay, did you want to add anything on that?
I would just echo what Kevin said. I think it's just kind of the vocabulary. The vocabulary piece is what we use every day, so it's nothing like that needs to be taught. It's just part of our team community and culture. So and strengths and areas of growth is always what we've used.
Right. Okay. I just, it's just kind of interesting how people, like, I really like the way you talked about what the successes were, instead of saying like strengths, just what are your successes? Sometimes strengths implies that a kid either has it or doesn't have it. Whereas a success might be something, well, I've struggled with this, but I had a successful moment. And I just kind of key into that academic language. So I'd actually like to, maybe talk about the next two items together. And the question, again, this is an open question to the panel, is people are really moving forward with proficiencies. And I just want to know what your proficiency and personalization efforts look like, if you have any examples of that. I often hear, that student choice is an example of personalization. And I'm not sure that's fully personalized learning. I think that we've always said that student choice is good. And so I'm interested in knowing how other people are looking at proficiencies and, either the PLP or personalized learning, and how they're dealing with that in their instruction and curriculum. And why don't we'll start with Allison this time, and again, just feel free to jump in.
This is actually my what I'm working on right now at St. Mike's, kind of this like my independent study, the integration of proficiencies and personalization, how it's working or not. And I would say my class personally is the only thing I can speak to, not as a whole team or as a whole school. But it comes out, we did the learner surveys within the site, and that lent itself to learners being able to not only choose but actually personalize the goals that we were working on within a section of the most recent unit. That was a highlight, and I got some really good feedback about whether we want to continue with that for future units.
So the kids were able to set individual goals for the unit, the learning in the unit?
Or within those, like within what those metamorphic rocks, so within what we wanted to achieve about metamorphic rocks, they chose their pathway and activities to get there.
Okay, thank you.
I can just chime in. So Don, you said that sometimes choice, we equate it with personalization, and I think the choice really does go with the flexible pathways piece, like how kids are going to demonstrate proficiency in some areas is really when you allow them choice to demonstrate that. So I do think it goes along with the personalization piece when we think about flexible pathways. For us, we have always been in a proficiency-based system, learning environment in some ways, and now we're thinking about it just in a little different way, but that's part of our language that we use, and we're really trying to focus on the transferable skills and how they can be applied to anything that they're doing, in their lives, and obviously mostly within the time that they're with us, but we're modeling that and what that would look like and how you would demonstrate showing evidence for those transferable skills. And we just developed our theme for our year-long project. So the kids are now in the stage where they're brainstorming potential projects with a theme and thinking back to their self and world questions that they started with in the beginning of the year, and developing a stronger idea. And then in the next week or two, they'll have their projects, really their focus for the year really solidified. But this year, and I can talk about it later, we're adding another layer to it with the sustainable development goals. So we're doing a little mini project right now to get them familiarized with those goals.
Okay, Maura?
So going back to the idea of like proficiencies and personalization, we're kind of undergoing a lot of changes around here. I'm on a whole new team. And so one of the things that I feel like really good about is sort of the handle on being really intentional about teaching around the proficiencies, giving students multiple options, and sort of tries of showing me their mastery of a standard, and giving students multiple attempts, like that feels really good. However, in terms of the sort of deep personalization of it or having it appearing on the PLP, it hasn't quite transferred to that place yet. But I see it going there eventually. In terms of sort of, I think going back to what Lindsay was saying, that allowing students the choice in how they're going to show that they're proficient, or giving them different opportunities and having them kind of pick their way to try and show you that they are proficient or have mastery in that skill, that is really my hope for where we end up.
Okay. Kev?
This is the first year that our whole school has moved toward proficiency based. We're in the same boat as Lindsay's team, where Swift House has used standards-based assessment and standards-based learning since its creation. But what's nice is now that it's a whole school, I feel like holistically, so when students are going off to world language or their other specials, so whether it be PE, art, family consumer sciences, there is that notion, as Maura was just talking about, that there's multiple attempts at doing something, and there's a lot of flexibility in terms of, well, here's our learning target, and show me how you're getting there, versus everything's an essay or everything's a Google presentation. So I'm very hopeful that in trimesters to come, we're going to start seeing a lot of that show up on the PLPs, because since the students make their transferable skill goals, then they use the work that they're doing inside or outside of school as evidence toward those goals. And a lot of times they are pulling from PE or from art, from world language to show evidence. So I'm hoping that we're going to see a broader, just a more dynamic evidence versus then just your typical, here's a French test that I passed. So I'm really excited for that, and I'm we've always been talking about this idea of personalization. That's one thing, Don, that I'm glad you brought up, like, is giving choice personalization. That's one thing I'd love to explore further and talk to other educators about, is how are you actually personalizing instruction? Because we do a lot with the choice-based things and the project-based, and independent research projects are more passion-based than anything. But I feel like there's another element that we can still tap into, especially at this age group. I'm just structurally, I don't know, or systematically, what that would look like as a change, or really how it goes. So I'm excited to hear from others about that.
Well, I just want to jump in here. I think I think you make a good point. And Lindsay, when I meant choice, like, I give choice, like, oh, you can do this project or you can do that type of project, and a kid can choose what they're good at, and maybe that's personalized learning. But I want to go back to something Allison said about designing curriculum with flexible pathways that a kid, and I think that that's a much more, as Kevin alluded to, that's a much more that's heavy duty. I mean, if you can design a curriculum where a kid has these flexible pathways where they can go through and meet the tag the proficiencies that they need to be proficient with, and how do you balance that with with content, and how do you organize this systematically? And I guess, so for example, one of the things, we have this green team, which is a sustainability practice, which is becoming more and more important to our program. And the kids just wrote a script. They went down to Orca Media, they filmed it, a couple kids edited it, and then they uploaded it to YouTube. And if you think of that, hits so many of our content area proficiencies, the writing, the presentations, the speaking, but it also hits all these transferable skill proficiencies, right? And so that video goes on the PLP, but how do you make that count for credit? How do you plug that into the system that we're in and make it so that the kid realizes that by doing this, I'm tagging these proficiencies and I'm able to, why couldn't the kid should be getting credit for that, right? It shouldn't just be that, I'm self-directed and I'm communicating. It should also be part of language arts. It should also be part of social studies. And so how do we wrap our heads around this idea of creating these flexible pathways within our curriculum that kids can take, that we can help them to identify what proficiencies they're hitting and then assess them in the same way? I would say that one of the things I'm struggling with this year is this: there's so many different ways of assessing now with proficiency. You have learning scales and you have all these different models and modes, and I'm most interested in what's going to work for kids. And I'm most interested in assessing kids in a way that says, you know what, you tried pretty hard on this, you still have a ways to go, keep at it. And that sort of that strength-based supportive assessment, rather than saying, oh, this is where you are, and you know what I'm saying? It's like supporting kids through assessment while they're meeting proficiencies in an engaging way. And this is one of the reasons I'm talking to you guys about it, because you have such good ideas, and just being able to coherently explain that to parents and students in a way that makes sense to them is something that I'm really thinking hard about and trying to incorporate into what we're doing on a daily basis. This is kind of wrapped up in this sort of the project-based learning. What does your curriculum look like right now? What are kids, how are they getting content? Is everything you're doing project related? And are all of your students moving along kind of the same pathway? Or maybe if you could just give me a brief overview of sort of what's happening in your class and how that's tied to proficiencies and the PLP. Go, anybody can jump in.
I can start. Because I work as a generalist, I can't really just talk about my class, but I can talk about my team. All of our kids are currently involved in an election focus project, and that's across our whole team. So in my humanities block, they're creating oops, am I there? There we go.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're creating, they're going to have a mock election for the school. So they are developing, you know, all the structures needed to have the mock election on November 7th. And we've been talking about democracy. We've been talking about the election process. We've had opportunities if they have the availability to do some live online chats during debates and talk about what's going on so that we can really break it down so it makes sense to them. In my teammate Phil in math class, they're conducting polls and integrating this data and statistics standards into that piece, and really looking at how the data changes daily. So they've been really diving into it. So we've really put a focus on what's going on currently, and then at the same time they're also starting to think about those sustainable development goals and which ones they connect with for their project work this year. And so really across the board, they have had a lot of different opportunities to kind of branch out and get invested in, you know, areas of interest, but we're all kind of, you know, with our guidance. Going back to what you were saying, Don, about the proficiencies and how we get kids to recognize that, you know, like what they did with the recording of the, did you say it was a PSA?
Yep.
Yeah. I think right now we're really in the stage where we have to like help them identify and model. I wonder how we can get kids and maybe it seems like, you know, just Act 77 is obviously very new, and we're still trying to figure out the right systems and ways to the language and everything. But I think that, you know, if we start by modeling and helping them identify, then ultimately they'll just be able to go in and say, oh, it's this or it's that. And I feel like you know, the nice thing that I'm not in any way a protean expert. We're just starting to figure out how to use it. But the nice thing is it does have the bank of transferable skills, and you know, and then also what other standards, if we wanted to add those in, they can pull from. So they constantly are seeing the language instead of before it was kind of like this mystery thing that was kind of just like hanging out there that only I had access to, even though I would try to give them access. So now it's like it's just as much theirs as it is mine, and so we're kind of sharing that responsibility in the sense that we have to figure out how we can tag our work and share our evidence. And so but as far as what we're doing right now, I feel like I have a duty to be really looking at the elections with them, but we're trying to do that across the board and relating it to as much of our core classes as possible.
Okay, got it. Other folks?
I can talk a little bit about what's happening in my classroom. So in terms of like project base, we are in humanities class. We have our district-wide on-demand writing prompt assessment that's coming up, and it's the week after the election. So I'm balancing sort of living in two worlds where I am teaching a specific writing genre to a on-demand writing assessment. So unfortunately, you know, all students are creating the same product. But we also are looking at the Electoral College and voting rights and sort of where does a vote go during the general election, and looking at sort of the interests of individuals and groups and how that's impacted based on voting rights and Electoral College and sort of the nuts and bolts behind the election. And we've also been pulling in lots of reading about the candidates and the debates and those different pieces, but really looking at the structure behind the voting process. But then in the afternoon, this year, school-wide actually, we have what's called opportunity time. And on my team, last year we had the experience of working on a negotiated curriculum framework that actually Lindsay helped us out a bunch with. And so we went through last year for our first round of developing a theme and students working on projects. And so this year we have our theme, we just decided our theme last week. And so we're having students sort of brainstorm their project ideas. And that's really where we're going to be looking at, mission-related goals specifically, and also habits of work, really thinking about linking it to those two pieces. But we're really hoping that this 40 minutes is a time when students can, create a plan and really run with it. So we're very excited to see what happens.
Okay. Kevin?
We're currently in the thick of our theater unit. So as of right now, we're just doing theater and math. Every year, Swift House, we put on 2 performances, one Shakespeare and one other. So this year we're doing A Midsummer Night's Dream and Phantom Tollbooth, and we have about 94 students. We split them up. We'll let them choose what play they want to be in. They audition for their parts. And then we have student directors, student stage managers, tech directors, the whole bit. And we're performing next Thursday. So it's definitely chaos right now. So I guess that's our project base right now. What's neat about that is on the side we have them doing these scene books. So they have the summary pages where they draw out the scene and they summarize. So there's still the element of, that's one of our learning targets from our literacy committee is the ability to summarize. So that's a neat feature with that. And it's just a fun team-wide thing that we do, and a lot of self-direction, citizenship pieces come up with that. So yeah, it's an absolute whirlwind with all the theater stuff going on.
Okay, all right, Allison.
Sure. I can't speak as much to the project-based learning. That sounds great with you all. We're just still very much in the phase right now, I feel, where we're flying the plane and fixing it too. Just getting teachers to wrap their heads around. Okay, we have that, and then now personalization, and just kind of that's the road we've taken, and starting with the proficiency-based learning and then moving towards personalization. So we're ending kind of in all 9th grade classes the first end of first unit or module of learning. So more to come from there.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm doing a lot with Google Maps this year, and we created a team Google Map. And so kids have been doing a unit on adaptation, and we started looking at Native Americans. And so kids had to identify artifacts and analyze those, and they're putting that on the map. And so we're hopeful that over the course of the whole year, we're going to have this Google Map with all sorts of points of interest and learning geography through that. We're also mapping Montpelier in Minecraft. So we've gone out and looked, we sliced out a section of Montpelier, the historic area, and we've taken a couple of walks. Like I have a packet of historical photographs, and we go out there and we do this walk around Montpelier. And then kids have chosen buildings in Montpelier, and then they're building them in Minecraft. And a lot of transferable skills in that, including there's actually a lot of math too, scaling and location and geography and collaboration. And so we're doing that. We've done it. We are holding an election. It was difficult to continue having discussions about the election, especially within the last 2 weeks, which is, I don't know what that says about our democracy when you can't talk about some of the things that they actually say in class. So we're doing that, and then we're as I mentioned, we're getting ready for conferences, and I'm just trying to, again, to think about all these proficiencies and projects like many of you are already doing. I said that we'd get done by 4:15, and it's rapidly approaching 4:15, and so I just had a couple announcements for folks, and I had a couple questions too. So one question was, Allison asked for a resource earlier in the discussion, and I'm wondering if we should just keep putting that on PLP pathways.
Yep.
And if that's the case, I need to make sure that you're all editors of that site. And that's sort of a broader discussion that we need to have is what is PLP, and at least for me, is what is PLP pathways going to look like? I'm getting some good feedback from other educators who are using the resource, but we need to keep making that dynamic. And if people are interested in doing that, I think we need to have sort of a meeting of all the PLP pathways people, including James Nagel, and really kind of discuss where this is going as a professional development tool. So I want to throw out a date out there, which is January 7th. which is the Middle Grades Institute's winter meeting. And if people could have that on their calendar, it is a Saturday, but at some point over the winter, I'd like us all to meet in person. And I'd like to, number one, gauge your interest in continuing to work. And number two, I'd like to get your ideas and insight about how you think we could make PLP pathways more dynamic and a place where folks who have questions or need resources can be dropping by and picking those up, a real grassroots teacher-directed effort. And I just want to repeat again that I've gotten some really great feedback from educators who have used this site, and I really appreciate what everybody's doing. So again, just quickly, January 7th, if you could put that on your calendar tentatively, also having a meeting together sometime over the winter. The other thing I wanted to mention really quickly is that your blog posts have been outstanding, and I really appreciate the work you've put into those. This year we've had, I think, twice as many blog posts already as we had last year. And so if people could be considering sort of a regular blog post, a regular contribution, you know, like maybe once every 6 weeks or something like that. I think everybody here has made blog posts. Some of you have made a couple of them, and they've been very, very good. And so if you could just continue doing that, I would appreciate that. And then that goes up on Twitter, and it also gets shared on Google+. And, you know, we can start getting, we're actually, our Twitter following is growing rapidly as well. So I'm hopeful that we can continue with that. And then the two more things. I'm presenting tomorrow at this Vermont After School Conference in Stowe, which is about helping extended learning opportunity providers understand what teachers are going to need. And if and this is tied also into this, Protean has this Learn House site, which is going to be a website where educators can go and find extended learning opportunity providers in their area. So I just want you to be aware of that. And if you have community partners who you're working with, who you know, who we could put on our Twitter feed or on our website, or we could give shout outs for the great work they're doing with our students, that would also really be welcomed. And then the last thing is that the VT Ed has these Twitter chats on, I think, every 2 weeks on Thursday. And I volunteered for PLP Pathways to take over the Twitter handle, This is VT Ed. And that starts next week. We have that Twitter handle from October 31st through November 4th. So what that means is I've got the password. We can be tweeting from This is VT Ed, and we can be tweeting whatever we want. And you know, we should be linking that to PLP Pathways. So if people have an interest in either taking it over for a day or feeding me tweets that they want to send out, I'd welcome your suggestions on that. And so I don't know actually what that's going to look like, but we certainly can. If you have programs that you're interested in, I know that Lindsay's working with Shelburne Farms. You know, if we have programs that you're interested in that you want to get out there in front of other educators, let me know. And let me know if you'd like to take that Twitter handle for a day, and I can send you the information, and then you can be tweeting on that handle during that day.
John, we have that this week, and what's going really well is our tech integration person has taken it over with our district admin, and they set us a table with things that we would like on it, and we can either send them photos if we have them or documents, or what we've been doing is when we tweet ourselves, if we just hashtag WSDVT, which they see, then they can push it out through the This is VT Ed. So I don't know if we want to like hashtag PLP Pathways on something, and then you can push that out, or if you just want to send us maybe a table and we can fill out like our name, what we're doing, what date it was, and then we can just email you any resources that seem to be really efficient. So
I was hoping to distribute the work and not do it, but actually that sounds like a good idea. How about if I just set up a spreadsheet and if you guys, and I'll share it with everybody, and then you can I'll put like hashtags that you want to see in there, information, and if you can just fill that in, I'll start tweeting that on Monday. And if you have other suggestions or you think it's not working during the week, just let me know. And you can take over. That goes out to anybody. So that'll be good. Does anybody have any closing comments? Nope. Okay, I just want to thank you guys again. This is a really great conversation. I really appreciate it. I know that people, I just keep going back to those posters in Maura's room, staying in control and coping with stress. And I know people are right in there right now. So just keep on doing what you're doing. Everybody's doing great work. And I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend. And I will be in touch. Thank you very much and have a good evening.